Hey, everybody. This is Nevin Gusak, your host of the Politically Homeless podcast. With me is my guest, Jacob. Am I pronouncing this correctly? Guys?
Giese, but yeah.
Easy.
Yeah.
Okay, Jacob Giese. Um, and Jacob is an activist in the Minnesota State Republican Party. And he's going to be joining us. We're going to be talking about Republican politics. Now, as many of you know, I'm a disillusioned Republican. I have bounced back and forth between different parties to vote in primaries. But at the end of the day, there are stated conservative goals that I like more entrepreneurship, national defense, which is a necessity, as well as strong families. However, I have argued countlessly on this program and other programs that the modern Reagan conservative movement, also known as fusionism, has proven, had argued, uh, really not measuring up to its promises, to even perhaps an abject failure. And with me, Jacob is going to give us kind of a bird's eye view of what's going on in the Midwest Republican Party. And he is, like me, someone who agrees with much of the realignment that is occurring with the conservative part of the conservative movement, the Republican Party, and patriotic elements of the left or the Democratic Party. And we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about what's going on the ground in the Republican Party, at least in the Midwest. And we're going to talk about economics, politics, national security. And then Jacob hopefully will give us some advice on what we can do on the local level to affect positive change in the Republican Party. Because we can't be the only Republicans that believe this. So with me, thank you so much for joining us, Jacob. How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. Pleased to be on your podcast. Great we met and that we could have this opportunity to chat a little bit. Yeah, a bit of about myself. He mentioned that I'm activist with the Minnesota Republican Party, specifically in the St. Louis County Republican Party. If you look at Minnesota, so it's kind of a weird shaped state, but if you look at Lake Superior, you'll find Duluth, which is one of our kind of bigger non-metro cities, and then pretty much from there north all the way to the border is St. Louis County, and I've bounced around different little spots just moving in life, but excuse me, my equipment's giving me some lip.
No problem.
But no, yeah, happy to talk about that. It's a really fun play since Nevin and I kind of started chatting over Twitter. I'm technically, my official position in the St. Louis County Party is I am the second vice chair of, I say social media, technically media in general. That means when you follow our Facebook account or Instagram or Twitter and your feed gets spammed by some crazy guy, that's me.
So we're going to blame you for all those emails, all those junk
emails. Yeah, I've not quite gotten to junk mail, but I'm dipping my toes into polls. So
there we go.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, if you'd like, to divulge anything about your professional background. Why you've become a Republican. What led you into the Republican Party as opposed to the Democratic Party, the left, etc.
Yeah, my family's kind of history, at least with my parents, they're both pretty socially conservative evangelicals, I guess you'd call them. I don't think they would necessarily pigeonhole themselves, but conservative Christians. So I was brought up in that atmosphere, and the Republican Party as far as being pro-life and kind of being the one that was open to more of the concerns of, we can loosely call it the Christian right. It kind of was the natural party for me to kind of grow up in. Not that my parents were that political. I actually don't know how I got as political as I am, because both my parents they would talk about voting, and my mom homeschooled us, so we talked about history a lot, and we're very patriotic in that, oh, George Washington, cool guy, you know. But then I remember something tripped in me. I wasn't even old enough to vote because I remember being really worried, you know, just not knowing what I do now. So forgive me if anyone, you know, I know that on the new kind of uh the the new right that's forming, that the name George Bush doesn't come with a lot of accolades, and I understand and agree nowadays. But back then, I was, you know, worried that the that I remember worrying that pro-life George Bush would lose to pro-choice John Kerry, and so that's kind of the like earliest I remember really thinking about it. And I think I went with my mom to the caucus that year just because she was interested in showing us the process. But then fast forward to when I was able to vote, it was just kind of this slow rolling stone gathering speed of just getting more and more interested and knowing who's running, who my senators are, what I believe. And so I've always been Republican, but I've been and but I've been really, really happy to see us rethinking a lot of our, especially economic policies. Really, my biggest concern with the party, and it spider web, or it branches out into many different tributaries, but the biggest one that has really vexed, and just looking back now from, you know, from hindsight's 2020, but looking back on all the years that I kind of spent arguing for this, that, and the other thing, I'm like, wow, it really was an economics that we lost as Republicans. And like, I couldn't see it until after 2016. That was a weird year for me because I was not a Trump supporter right away. I'll just get that out of it. Please forgive me if you, I don't know, if some people don't forgive easy on that. It's which I don't agree with. I think I totally, I love when people tell me, hey, you know, I didn't get Trump until he did this. Well, I'm one of those people. I was a Ted Cruz guy. I was a good libertarian social conservative up until the bitter end when Trump won. So I didn't know what the heck was going on in 2016. But then I started afterwards, because I remember getting up in 2016 and just, you know, scrolling through my phone. It's like, I don't really care. I had kind of given up on the presidential election, but I was like, oh, I want to know who won, thinking it was going to be Hillary Clinton, because of course it was going to be Hillary Clinton. And I see it's Donald Trump, and I remember laughing. Yeah. But the coolest thing about, and you mentioned it earlier, sort of in the negative, but I'll try to spin it positive, that Trump opened the eyes of a lot of people, even if he, as a movement in himself, hasn't lived up to what we were hoping. He's lit the fire on, or I shouldn't say he's lit the fire, but the holes he blasted in the Republican establishment allowed so much new blood, even if just in terms of ideas and tweets, to get credit, to get air where they would never have been squashed immediately as, you know, socialist or something like that.
Yes.
So that kind of leads me to St. Louis County, where we've lived about almost 12 years now. St. Louis County is a really cool county because it is a historically Democratic stronghold. Like, it is, it's almost like a taste of like pencil. I might speak ignorantly saying this, but it's almost like a little slice of Pennsylvania smashed up into Minnesota, because the rest of Minnesota is not really like us. You have the metro, you have the southern and western points, which are all farmland or quite a bit of farmland. And then you have kind of the central north with which is kind of the touristy lake areas. But then you have the Arrowhead, which is all of a sudden you're in Union country, Union mining country. And historically, within living memory, it's been represented by Democrats. And, it wasn't even close. Like, the Republicans would maybe get to 40% on a good year. But then all of a sudden Trump comes and he's talking about these things which, the nicest conservatives will say, like tariffs and trade deficits and stuff, things the nicest conservatives of the time would maybe say, oh, well, that was nice back in Alexander Hamilton's days, but we don't have any use for that anymore. We've got we've moved on since the 90s. But he won the Iron Range, or at least a good chunk of it, and he actually almost won Minnesota, which again was very unexpected. And so the logical thing to do, again, in retrospect, to be fair, is to say, what the heck happened? And you talk about realignment. Well, what it was these union miners it's funny because, just to step back, we would always say in the Republican circles that, oh, these Iron Rangers are Republicans, they just don't know it yet, because they're very traditional in their family values, very patriotic, very community orientated, which is definitely something that I've, as I mentioned, I didn't grow up here, but I've come to just deeply love about this area, is its sense of community. But they kind of, in a roundabout way, saw through the utopian promise, maybe let's call it, of this kind of market fundamentalist free trade stuff that the GOP was pushing. And whether or not the Republicans want to admit it, and overtly hostile to labor tones that they were taking all over if not directly in Minnesota, then all around the country. I mean, people see as a local activist, when I'm talking to people about news, we have to talk about national first, because that's what people are watching, and then we get to the local. So it's no good saying, oh, well, the local GOP is pro this, that, or the other thing. Well, I shouldn't say it's no good, but a lot of our trouble was they were watching on, all these states, especially Wisconsin. That was a big one. Go to work and make overtly hostile overtones to unions, and the Iron Range wanted none of that. And I've come to deeply respect and understand that inclination. But then, so after Trump, things started to really change. We'd been kind of at the local ground realizing, okay, these union guys, we need to get in with them. What can we do? Let's find some, this right to work thing. I don't know. But Trump really opened up the wound, well, it was a wound in a sense, and let us start to talk about, okay, well, we don't want right to work. We're going to run candidates that aren't right to work. We're going to kind of push ourselves as the pro mining obvious choice. And then what happened that also shook things up that I can't pass over is, so we had two state senators. They're two state and their names were Tom Back and David Tomasoni, and those are like legendary names up here. Like everybody knows somebody who's a Tomasoni, or you've met Tom Bach, and they were our state senators, and they both quit the DFL.
Mm-hmm.
I should explain. In Minnesota, I don't know why or how it happened, but the Democrats are officially the Democratic Farmer Labor Party.
That's
So,
right. Heard of them, yeah.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's just the Democrats. I mean, there's really no difference. But something that happened in the past, we used to have a party, a very actually popular party that won several governorships and stuff, called the Farmer Labor Party. And they, at some point, I believe in the early 20th century, like probably around Woodrow Wilson, maybe a little later, formed the Democratic Farmer Labor Party. Actually, I think it was even later than that. I think it was something like maybe in the 50s or 70s. So, I mean, it's a long way of saying it's been really fun. We talk about this realignment, but to kind of witness it firsthand, to be as a Republican who really is kind of was dying for something new, because like I said, Trump opened up all these avenues, and I'm like, wait a minute, that all makes sense, because nothing we'd been doing really is, if we say we're pro-family, we're not conserving families. If we say we're pro, American economy, our industrial base is gutted. It's a shadow of its former self. I was just reading a book on Dwight Eisenhower, and it talked about just the sheer might that American industry held during that time, that we were able to do what we did during World War II, which, by the way, I should mention, most of the steel we used in World War II was mined right where I'm at,
Mm-hmm.
which is pretty cool. I feel like I'm rambling. Did you want to interject at all?
No, you're giving a lot of valuable experience and insights. I mean, I started out, my mother was an independent leaning Republican. My stepdad was a strong Republican, but sort of an old school. I mean, he liked Reagan, but he had more populist tendencies. He was very strongly anti-communist. He did serve in the Army as a military policeman and MP. So I always came into the Republican Party from a strong pro-national defense, patriotic position. And I grew to be an economic libertarian and believed in Reaganomics. And I became really disillusioned with it for a variety of different reasons. I joined the John Birch Society, and then for a little bit in the 1990s. And I discovered in their periodicals, the New American, and then its predecessor, the American Opinion, they mustered and brought out evidence that showed how major American corporations and banks provided loans, grants, and all manner of capital goods, including machinery, raw materials when needed, grain, computers, and machine tools, and ball bearings and whatnot, to National Socialist Germany, Fascist Italy, militarist Japan, the Soviet Union, Communist China during the Cold War, and even into the 1990s, of course. So that really started to make me think twice about my prior adherence to free trade. And that just continued from a variety of research that I've done, changes that I've seen even in my native state of New York. I went to school in upstate New York and grew up in Long Island in the greater New York City area, and there was quite a bit of deindustrialization that occurred there too as well. I mean, you still have industry, don't get me wrong, but it's not what it used to be, I can assure you of that. And I started to listen to dissident conservatives and Birch Society type of commentators, like the Birch Society type fellow travelers like Donald McIlvaney or Don McIlvaney of the McIlvaney Intelligence Advisor. And he started to bring up how, and others were bringing up how Ronald Reagan had a very contradictory policy towards dealing with communist countries and other allies of the Soviet Union at that time. And that really kind of shocked me. I really just didn't know what to make of it at this time. I was a bit shell-shocked because Reagan was a hero. I voted in 1992 for George Herbert Walker Bush. Knowing what I know now, I would have voted hands down for H. Ross Perot in the 1992 election. But I digress. So what happened is that I started to really have second thoughts. I started to read, when I came down to Florida, I came across the websites WorldNet Daily and Newsmax, and they ran columns by a geopolitical analyst who's a frequent guest in our program. Those of you in the audience know his name is J.R. Nyquist, and he started to talk about how the Soviet Union, that its collapse was not what it seemed to be, to put it very gently. And I read books by a variety of defectors from the communist world, particularly like former KGB Major Anatoly Golitsyn. And what had happened is I read that book, and he talked about how a lot of the splits in the communist world during the Cold War were fake, that the Soviet Union was going to strategically collapse itself in order to then provoke the West to lower its guard and send even more trade and technology and political legitimacy to the Soviet Union and the former bloc countries and China. So I read that and I didn't quite believe it. But then when I started to read J.R. Nyquist's columns, I read his first book, The Origins of the Fourth World War. I was in library school, so I started to really do a deep dive in LexisNexis, Academic Universe, ProQuest, the various databases for congressional hearings, using interlibrary loan to get a plethora of books, journal articles, etc. And I put two and two together that people like Golitsyn and Nyquist were more correct than wrong, that there were actually conservatives at the time, like former Senator Jesse Helms, Howard Phillips, Donald McIlvaney, some of the business associations that were patriotic. They were warning Reagan and the Republican Party that Gorbachev was simply deceiving the United States. And I started to read primary source Soviet documents, ones that were either declassified and smuggled out during the 1990s, when there was some loosening of the restrictions, but it was never total. And then reading primary source Soviet press, speeches, etc., I really came to the conclusion that that the Cold War never really ended. I know it sounds crazy to many people, but and I've written books about this with massive amounts of footnotes. And I that worked hand in hand on the fact that in the Republican Party and Conservative Incorporated and many of your major sort of so-called conservative and libertarian think tanks, there was a lot of corruption. There was a lot of outright denial of the threat of China and Russia. In some cases, like the Cato Institute, they denied basically the Soviet threat even existed when you look at some of their articles that they've written and the positions that they've taken over the decades. So I started to really scratch my head about that, and I saw that how free market fundamentalism, and then you had the 2008, 2009 Great Recession, and free market fundamentalism in general actually causes massive instability of capitalism. It was proving Marx's dream that capitalism will eat itself alive, as Marx said in the Communist Manifesto. The bourgeoisie contains its own gravediggers. And I saw how capitalism was selling the rope to its enemies abroad. And I started just to see the results of trickle-down economics, how Reagan basically canceled out the construction differential subsidy that kept our merchant marine shipbuilding afloat. I read different reports how, including in the Iron Range during the 1980s, there was massive economic devastation as a result of deindustrialization and financialization of promoted by Reagan and his successors. Um, and, I put two and two together. I really the argument was coming in my mind, that the view was coming into my mind that really conservatism was undermining its goals, that really it was becoming anti-conservative in many ways, that it was actually actively hurting the country as much as the extreme left, if not even more. And when you read and listen to what Ben Shapiro and Milton Friedman and James Buchanan, the former libertarian economist who's deceased, along with Friedman and others, is a sort of extreme callous social Darwinism with conservatism, and that type of capitalism that it gave birth to is really antagonizing people to embrace the extreme left socialist and communist movements like DSA, CPUSA, and others. Not that they're a numerical majority of political opinion in the United States, but you see the polls, more and more younger people are embracing socialism, and in some cases even fascism or communism to a lesser degree. So I just see that there needs to be a major change. And I've had some, political experience, did some political campaigns for Lieutenant Colonel Allen West, who I thought would be a different Republican. And this was during the Tea Party era from 2010 until about 2013, 2014. And I supported Trump very staunchly. I was on Cliff Kincaid's America's Survival Roku TV, where it's a nonprofit. I can't explicitly support Trump, but I discuss Trump's positives and some of the areas of concern. And I voted for Trump in the Republican primary in 2016 and in the general election. I did not vote for him in 2020. He disappointed me as soon as basically he came into office. Within months, I pretty much went against him. But I supported him because, again, I thought he would be a different Republican. Like I had thought that Allen West would have been a different type of Republican, because he campaigned, accepting, as legitimate certain regulations, like reintroducing Glass-Steagall. Allen West supported reinvigorating our manufacturing base. He had an understanding that Russia and China posed threats to the United States, and he recognized, as a former public school teacher in Florida for a brief period, he realized that the high stakes testing, or like the FCAT down here in Florida, was actually not improving education. But when he came into office, he basically voted on certain key issues, like on trade issues and economic issues, the wrong way. And I've had some other brush ups too as well. I worked for another campaign who was a sort of Tea Party military veteran of Vietnam, and his name is Mike Lemire, and he was totally ostracized by the plutocratic elite, Republican elites in Palm Beach County. People like Jack Fenari, notably, who is I believe is the head of the BizPac Review, which is a publication. And not a nice man. I've never met him, but I've interacted with him online anonymously, and I've seen him from a distance, and I had a totally bad vibe about him. And there was a lot of ruthless operators in the Republican Party down here in Florida. They tended to be, from what I recall, very libertarian, very Reaganomics, very hostile. The leadership is very hostile towards unions. They're basically almost like the bourbon Democrats of the old South. And that's actually what happened. There was a flip over, and this was admitted by Lee Atwater in various memorandums that I saw on the Reagan Library website, where he admitted that the Bourbons basically became the Republican Party in the South. And I think those attitudes have shifted. Unfortunately, Bourbon Democrat economics, which are very anti-populist, they're very much against protectionism, and they're very anti-labor. The only thing missing is the overt anti-Black racism, but, and it really turned me off. I also don't like when powerful elites bully people. And I found with the Republican Party, at least nationally and in Florida, that they would pick on people who individually did not have power, like immigrants and LGBTQ folks and others. And they would always use this, what I would term the circus of distraction, to just use propaganda to distract people from really what's going on. And then just the hypocrisy. They would say, well, we're against socialism. Okay, when their wealthy donors have to pay a few more taxes or have some more regulations, oh my God, that's socialism. We're going to become like a dictatorship like North Korea or China or Putin's Russia. But yet when these same wealthy donors of conservative incorporated in the Republican Party, when these wealthy donors want to increase trade with Putin's Russia or China or communist Vietnam or wherever, oh, that's free trade, that's free markets, and we got to support this and everything else. And what I've learned from other people who have rubbed shoulders in the conservative movement, people like Tina Trent, J.R. Nyquist, myself, Mike Lemire, and others, that there's a tremendous amount of plutocratic corruption really in both parties. And not that I'm against the rich because they're rich. They need to have a seat at the table. But the problem is they're monopolizing all the seats at the table and crowding out other voices in labor, in small business, and big businesses that are very patriotic or rooted in the soil of the country, and people who are advocates of national security. Our voices are being deafened. And you see that happening with the bill that's in both houses of Congress that Tim Scott and Congressman McHenry, who I saw on Twitter is retiring, good riddance, from North Carolina. And they're the ones putting the brakes on this legislation that would crack down and really more strictly regulate and restrict communist Chinese investment in the United States. So that's really what turned me into what I term a radical civic nationalist. And, that's my ideology. I'm politically homeless. And that's pretty much it in a nutshell. I'm sorry I rambled on, but that's where I'm coming from.
Mm-hmm. No, you mentioned Tim Scott. I've had more than a few. I don't tend to yell at my phone, but I'm mentally yelling at my phone the last several times I've seen Tim Scott and Nikki Haley, because they've just it's like they got caught whiff that some Republicans are trying to go pro-union, and they just decided we got to go the exact opposite. And I found that more funny than, I don't really, Tim Scott has no chance at winning the presidency. Nikki Haley really doesn't either, I don't think. But it's interesting watching kind of the old guard kick and flail, and like just think for some reason, oh yeah, the reason that they don't like us anymore is because we're not going hard enough on being anti-union or being pro-tax cut and all that kind of stuff. And I just thought you had mentioned that. I just thought it was an amusing thought.
Yeah, one of the things that concerns me is the Republican candidates, and maybe you can comment on this.
Oh, sure.
None of them really support the realignment, and maybe you can describe what this realignment is before you give your opinion on the candidates. Sure. But one observation that I have is none of the candidates adequately reflect any of the sort of Trumpian populism or civic nationalism. They're all staunch anti-union. I mean, Vivek Ramaswamy wants to fire 1 million federal workers, and he even gave an outline of it over the Patrick and Bet-David podcast. And really, to tell you the truth, it's really intended to make the government ineffective, essentially, because you want to have talented personnel in the government. You don't want people that are incompetent or people there for a short period of time with a sword of Damocles hovering over their head, and boom, you want to keep your expertise as much as possible there. And the other thing is that he claims that, yes, interesting in the Biden era, he all of a sudden in the same breath says, well, we created 8 million new jobs in the private sector in the United States, which is interesting. He's saying it under the Biden presidency.
Yeah.
I thought it was very interesting. But yet, so you're going to put an accountant at Walmart or some other retail position. Number one, they might not have that kind of experience or expertise going from the government to more than likely a retail or a sales position or a warehouse position, which may not pay as much. The other thing is these people have mortgages, families. Are you saying they should just get uprooted from their communities? They've been there for years and decades and go somewhere else. So this is the thing. This is what I'm talking about, where conservatism undermines its values. You and I, Jacob, we support local communitarianism and local community building, but yet Vivek is not supporting that. Now, the other thing I don't like about Vivek, and I mean, I'm going to there are things I like about all of them and things I don't like about all of the candidates. It's a mixed bag. The other thing about Vivek that concerns me, of course, is his pro-Russia position. And this is where I kind of disagree with some of the realignment people like Cigar and Jetty and others. I'm not for supporting Ukraine with troops or no-fly zones, but I do think as much as it's feasible with supplying them with weapons and training. But of course, there are limitations to what we can do because we've been deindustrialized so much that there are production and ammunition shortages that we have. We're not the arsenal of democracy, so to speak, anymore. So that does present a problem if we can still continue to provide Ukraine with those weapons in our aid package. But I digress. The thing is Vivek is basically an apologist for Putin. He's very much incorrect on the nature of Russia-China alliance. China and Russia have been allies since Gorbachev and Deng Xiaoping repaired their split in 1989, the Sino-Soviet split. And I have argued that the Sino-Soviet split was vastly exaggerated too, because there was still quite a bit of collaboration and alignment on issues between China and the Soviet Union. So I take the position that the split was vastly exaggerated, and I've written about that, and others have written about it, but I probably have written the most detailed account of that. So many of the candidates, all the candidates, Chris Christie has a horrible history with unions. Nikki Haley, as you mentioned, same thing. She actually said when she was governor, she's like, to the Boeing's attempts to unionize, she's like, unions are not wanted. I don't like unions. They need to stay the heck out of South Carolina. She was very nasty about it. Really, the candidates do not reflect the realignment. And Trump's record, I think there are some things I agreed with him on here and there on some of the foreign policy stuff. The tariffs I agree with, but the problem is that he didn't strike at the core of the problem, which was the current system of American capitalism, which is all about shareholder value, which means, hey, we make profits, it's going to be reinvested into stock buybacks instead of new production. So the problem, the thing is that Trump really didn't tackle that. Trump's revolution was hijacked. Very much how Reagan's revolution, that was supposed to result in a total tidal wave advance against communism and Soviet allies throughout the world, was also undermined too as well, because they brought in people that were associated with big business, with the multinational corporations in Wall Street. And that same thing that happened with Trump. His administration was hijacked by the Heritage Foundation, by the AEI, which is American Enterprise Institute, and the Republican establishment and the Tea Party and everything. They brought in all these people that really undermined most of Trump's positions. ALEC was another one that also had its presence. So you had people like Mark Levin, Glenn Beck, and even I got an email from the Capital Research Center. They all said that basically Trump defied their expectations, that he was a conservative like Reagan. He ignored populism and in civic nationalism. And some of the good people in his administration, like Peter Navarro and and Robert Lighthizer were more or less undermined. In fact, Peter Navarro wrote two books where he, including his latest book, which was a sort of his memoirs on his activities in the Trump administration, where just Trump's trade and nationalist agenda was just undermined left and right. And yeah, so really many of the candidates, I don't trust Nikki Haley and others to go tough on China and Russia because they're puppets of donors. I mean, the Koch brothers just endorsed Nikki Haley. Koch Industries and its affiliates and subsidiaries, they're one of the companies that absolutely refuse to comply with sanctions against Russia. And the Kochs are very authoritarian when it comes to controlling their fake grassroots organizations and who they donate money to. Tina Trent has talked about that on this show, who used to be a former field organizer in Florida or for Americans for Prosperity. She was high up in that. So, yeah, and others have talked about it. Some people who used to be affiliated with the Koch network, that talked about that. So what is I know I'm kind of rambling on and on, but I'm giving you my points of view, my analysis of Trump, as well as the candidates, how they really have not, the Republican Party has not learned, at least all the candidates, the leaders, the donors. And I think a lot of this has to do with ideology, and much of this also has to do with wealthy donor driven corruption. What is your definition of the realignment, and what is your take on the Republican candidates running?
The realignment can have a lot of different meanings. In fact, I almost thought of two right away because one of my favorite people to follow on Twitter is Sohrab Ahmari, who I think we'll see, it's interesting to watch. He may end up being the William F. Buckley of kind of the resurgent conservative populism. We'll see though. That's my own thing. The realignment is, to me, it's really like a reawakening, remembering that this story, because humans, I'm not going to get too in the weeds, but humans, I like to write. Humans tell stories to get our points across. Our brains are made to create patterns, and patterns really is a way of it in a roundabout way. It's a way of saying it makes stories for us to relate to our world. And what the realignment with conservatism is for me is us breaking free of a narrative of a story that has gotten so many plot holes that it can't hold water anymore. And yes, there's going to be a million people who haven't decided that's the case yet, and but another one is I mentioned Sohrab Ahmari, and to me, with Sohrab Ahmari, I liked his idea of this kind of march towards radical centrism. And what it really is, and I'll put kind of my cards on the table, is a center to center left economics with a center to center right social program. And finding that is where America has probably been all along. Everyone wonders, well, why does this state flip this way and that way? It's because because you're only getting half of a subject right at a time. Why does I've heard people literally say, like, oh, Massachusetts, they're really not that liberal. If you talk to people, they're not that liberal. Like, well, that's what they said about the Iron Range. So all I can imagine then is because the Republicans so forgot who we were as far as like economic nationalism and supporting industries that we can't even like make verbal contact with these people to a point where A, they'll believe us, or B, that they really understand what we're trying to tell them. So the realignment is us remembering stuff that we've long forgotten and bringing that back to the forefront to hopefully create a new political focus on workers, but one that actually delivers on all these promises we've made to ourselves and to the country as Republicans saying, well, our communities are going to grow, our families are going to be strong, we're going to have jobs and all this kind of thing. But well, none of those have happened since I've been politically active. I've seen, failure after failure after failure. And this is, it's not just the Republicans' failure, it's the push of the far left as well. But there's no real wall there with this economic libertarianism cannot create social stability. As you mentioned with Marx kind of foresaw that unrestricted capitalism can't conserve anything. It's not going to. The impetus for profit and for creative destruction, to use something that people use otherwise favorably, it's too strong. So you do need safeguards for communities and families and nations, whether that, however that ends up looking. That's a long way of saying the realignment to me is something very deep and holistic, that we're as that we're kind of picking up. It's like a collective like someone snapping their fingers in front of your eyes, and all of a sudden you do that blink like they do in the movies, and you're like, oh, that's how it felt for me anyway. And I know there's other people I love. If you want like a politician, I'd stick my, and I know nobody's perfect, and that's it. When we get to the activism part, I'm going to tell your viewers that nobody's perfect. But the politicians I often love hearing from are people like Josh Hawley, Senator Vance. He's more conventional. Our Congressman Pete Stauber, I really like him. He's really, for us, gone to bat with being more and helped us be able to push a more pro-union message. Again, this is one of those, like I said, nobody's perfect. He sounds like a Reaganite when he talks, and often a lot of his reasoning is still that way. But he's been a blessing for our area in terms of the realignment. So,
nice.
Yeah. So don't write someone off just because you might not agree with how they talk, or even how he doesn't always vote how I like, that's life. But with regards to the presidential candidates, I'm going to try to be, well, I guess I was mean to a couple of them.
I mean, there are things I like about them and things I don't. I try to be pretty fair with them.
Yeah, well, I was just saying, as far as my official position is, as part of the Republican Party of St. Louis County, I will support the eventual endorsed candidates of whichever positions. That's part of my job, unless they were so heinous that I decided I couldn't support them in good faith. So, well, and I say that knowing full well that I just badmouthed two of them. But yeah, it's been kind of dry as far as the real populist rhetoric, which I like to see. I've told people, well, maybe I'll go somewhere else. With Trump, even, who I still think is the best on the Republican side. It's not an official endorsement or anything, but he, at least when I'm reading his issues page on his computer, on his website, however much that counts for, he seems to hit the notes that I think are at least pointing the way I'm thinking things should go. Unfortunately, I think for a lot of us who are populists, dreaming of somebody to come and talk more like maybe a Josh Hawley or a J.D. Vance on the stump, I think a lot of Trump's Republican base support comes from social conservatives which seems counterintuitive, but in the stool of old fusionist conservatism, where you had what was it supposed to be? You had the social conservatives, you had the national defense conservatives, and there was one more.
The economic free market
The libertarians. Yeah. Out of those three, and I'm sure that the people of the other stools, but having grown up in social conservative circles, I feel like I can speak to this pretty well. The social conservatives feel incredibly like the most battered of the three legs, of the ones who are always asked, okay, yeah, I know this judge just screwed you over on this issue. I know, oh, your churches are emptying and this person in Portland got whatever, but we really need you to vote for us or these people are gonna turn us socialist. And and the fact for the Democrats is they became so totally pro-choice that that a lot of social conservatives didn't feel like there was no choice for them because their values said this and this comes first, and I'm not getting any of that with the other guy. Even if a lot of social conservatives, I think, if you sat and talked to them, are pretty Centerville on economics.
Yes, that's been my experience too. Social, a portion of them are radically libertarian, but a number of them are, depending on who you talk to, because I know social conservatives, including some of my friends, are evangelical Christians, and a portion of them are pro-labor or populist, meaning being socialist.
Yeah. But
and some of the social conservatives like Gary Bauer and others, I remember this, there have been major splits on issues of trade with the old Soviet Union and China between portions within the social conservative wing of the Republican Party and the conservative movement in general.
Oh, exactly.
There are splits.
Oh, exactly. So, there's been that tension there. And you've seen a lot of even like a Pat Buchanan or especially like Mike Huckabee. Mike was kind of the apotheosis. I know, being from a more southern state, I'm sure he was less populist than I would have liked. If I were back in 2008 looking at the primary challengers. But I'll just move ahead.
Yeah, they did not like the Club for Growth, for example, did not like Huckabee when I think he did his first foray into presidential politics, and he said, look, we shouldn't be depending on manufactured goods from China, oil from Saudi Arabia, this from Japan, that from Putin's Russia. And the Club for Growth, they basically insulted him.
Yeah, exactly.
I have no use for this show and myself included. We have no use for groups like the Club for Growth at all. They're un-American as far as I'm concerned, and anti-American.
Well,
sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay. But going back to the social conservatives and Trump, they what I think is happening right now is it's kind of a unfortunate marketing thing kind of going on, where the social conservatives finally, in a sense, had a champion who, did he have like what if you got a social conservative to write down their goals, before Trump and then asked after Trump's first term, did you get everything? They're going to say no. Like by any stretch of the imagination, they didn't get anything. Or not, I shouldn't say anything. They didn't get everything they should have wanted, but what they got, and it's amazing how far this goes. Just as myself in my position as a activist, I'm very interested in marketing as far as watching how people are selling themselves and their positions and stuff like that. But it's amazing how far it goes when people think you're fighting for them. When people get that you actually at least care to hear their opinion. And like Donald Trump, the former New York Democrat turns up at the biggest pro-life parade in Washington. First, was he the first president to ever do so? And that includes Ronald Reagan, who's the other kind of saint of the fusionist movement. So what's happening is Trump, I think his campaign in a lot of ways sees that those are the people who are going to come out strongest for him, especially during the primaries. And so from the little I've watched, unless something really heinous happens, or maybe Nikki Haley became the presidential nominee, I'm going to support the presidential candidate as part of my job.
Right, you have to.
But
the REC would have to, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I think as someone who wants to see more populist energy, right now that's being diverted into basically going after making sure that the social conservative grassroots are completely locked up for himself. And I don't know if that's and I couldn't even say whether or not he'll pivot, because I don't know if he has to. Like, Biden is really, he remains fairly unpopular. Again, that's kind of part of the weird realignment moment we're at, is that neither party is really that popular. Like I said, both have a part of the whole picture. One has the kind of center to center right traditionalist mentality, which a lot of people can't even like, if you just talk to, like, you go into Hobby Lobby and you talk to a bunch of the people, they're all going to talk like they live. They're not going to talk like their family is a bunch of, how would you say it, radicals from Berkeley College. They're going to talk like people about their families and about their jobs and stuff, like people have talked since, time immemorial, because America's, again, the center to center right kind of traditionalist social view, it's not a policy, but a view but then on the Democrats, you have the center to center left economics, which actually promotes the idea of worker power, of wages that are high enough to start a family on, even if they don't really like, a lot of the more radical intellectuals on the left don't like the whole family marketing thing. So each party has a piece of the puzzle, but their ideologies right now don't let them both they can't make sense while the two pieces are apart. And I wrote a post just on my private Facebook post the other day saying, look, the real race right now in politics is whoever figures out the mix of center to center left economics and center to center right social positions first is going to be the party that dominates the next 50 years culturally and politically, though it's not like it's going to be one party rule, but it's kind of like we talked briefly about FDR on Twitter. And really what had happened, if you look at FDR's coalition, yes, a lot of conservatives, I should say, like conservative Inc. groups kind of like to paint him out as this commie radical, but his coalition included a lot of social conservatives, and who were repaid with solid communities and et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of in the cake. It just, for some reason, all of our political elite and our political kind of just scene in general is shattered right now. And I don't know if you read Sohrab Ahmari's most recent piece about, it was basic, as he's actually had a couple really good ones well, more positive ones. I like the positive ones because I could work with encouragement. I don't, yeah. But he does. It was, I forget the actual title, but he was talking about ostensibly to the Republican Party, saying this is how you need to go about talking to unions because you guys kind of need each other.
I subscribe, just so you know, not to interrupt, I subscribe to Compact, so I did happen to read that article. It was excellent. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, he's always a good read. But he subtly, not so subtly, pokes at the whole Republican establishment, social conservatives, libertarians, all this, and it's like, you guys talk when you're talking about unions and kind of workers and stuff, you always bring up he calls her the PHB, the purple-haired barista, which I think is I thought that was a hilarious thing. But he's like, if you really look at this with I encourage people, I'm not going to get it right, so please go read to your listeners, please go read it on Compact. You'll see it. It says GOP, how you can win unions or something like that.
Yes.
But he says, if you really look at this whole last 50 years or 40 years, she's as much your creation, Republican Party, as she is the creation of the radical left. And I think that is, if I can kind of dodge into activism, a really, really good selling point for the worldview of the more populist realignment Republicans is to say, hey, I agree with you. This crazy purple-haired, person, who's spouting off, radical gender ideology and stuff like that. I agree with you on, yada, 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 but, you have to see if this is what you say you want, what you are doing is creating more purple-haired baristas. And I'm actually gonna be strapped for time pretty quick. So if you don't mind, I'd like to get into a little bit of the activism part.
Yes, that was going to be my next question. What does it look like on the ground in St. Louis County with the ideas that we have? And what can people do, conservatives and even dissident libertarians who may be rethinking their ideology, and Republicans who think like us, what can we do to push our message in a way that is effective? So I'll give you the floor for those two questions before we conclude.
Yeah. So my biggest, one of my guys, we talk about the Daily Wire, and I've pretty much split from them as far as their libertarian economics, like Ben Shapiro, yada yada. But someone I always come back to is Andrew Klavan, who I think is a really straight shooter, and even where I disagree with him, he's coming at it as an artist. So I think it's such a radically different view than strict economics that that he bears listening to in a lot of things. But one of his videos he did, the title was "Your Greatest Weapon is Joy." And I think we lose so much of that during our political discourse. We want to save the country. That's heavy stuff. We want it to push but the fact of the matter is, everybody, especially right now, post 20, I'm going to say post 2016, because that was a heavy election that people still haven't recovered from. And then post COVID and post 2020, everybody feels really heavy still. I really think they do. And I think even in the parts of activism where you have to deal with people and they want to, just talk about the worst things happening, I think my tactic anyway is to respond with encouragement and gratitude. Really, if you go on, let me hold on. I'm going to get up one of our Facebook pages. We actually have 2 pages, which is a long story, but necessary for our group. Like if you follow, it's MNGOP at St. Louis County on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I try to do almost more than anything else is I try to promote community events that have like nothing to do with politics. I try to promote the things that I see as my worldview in action, the good part of it. I try to put that up in front of people and say, hey, look at these union guys. They're going to be able to feed their family, to raise a family, maybe even on a single income now. Isn't that awesome? Doesn't that helps families? We should be so for that.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And I actually he was a Democrat. He was following our pages, and he would I could see him comment and kind of maybe scrap with some people in the comments, but he never really yelled at the page. And all of a sudden he goes, I probably don't agree with most of what this page says, but I can really tell that you care about this community. And that right there was a huge, kind of reward for me, because that was kind of what I'm trying to do. I want people to have that holistic politics where we see how much family relies on jobs, relies on, you could say religion, all these things, and to show people the joy of that and the gratitude that we have for those things, when those things in action, I think becomes very infectious. Again, it doesn't feel, it doesn't feel as intuitive as, and I'm not saying I never do. I definitely post things. Oh, look at what so and so's doing wrong and such, and that's politics. It's part of it. But to cut that through with I remember, I'm trying to remember. I think it was back when I was in college and kind of was helping out with some college Republican stuff. We got some like paraphernalia, T-shirts or whatever, and it said the #1 party on campus. And whether or not that's true, is up to debate depending on the campus.
I remember that we had that. I was in the Florida Atlantic University College Republicans, and there was some similar like kind of paraphernalia and slogans, and it was fun. It was trying to create a fun atmosphere. People respond to that.
Yeah, but that's just it. And I'm not saying you don't. You can't try to be cool. You know what I mean? Like if you have to try to be cool, you're not, that kind of thing. So that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying, woo, look at us, we're so cool. I'm saying create an atmosphere around yourself and around your ideas that make them sparkle, that make them the place people want to be. And another, as far as activism, again, I'm going to say, don't be this is a sanity thing, because if I'm telling people to get into activism, it's a deep rabbit hole. And so, I want to warn people, always be okay with planting a seed. It's like, I'll put out something into the ether. Like I'll post, kind of one of the more radical Sohrab Ahmari posts on the official post, and I have to gauge, how much people, because we still have the whole slew of libertarian conservatives and yada 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 in our state party especially. But so I'll put out a piece that's a little more quote unquote radical, and I'll be like, oh yeah, this is gonna get it. This is awesome. This is so cool, and nobody likes it. Nothing happens to it. Absolutely nothing. No comments. No anything. you have to be okay with that one person who buzzes by it on Facebook, or, when you're talking to somebody at a dinner, and they kind of listen to you do your spiel on corporate tyranny, and they're like, huh, and they move on. You have to be okay as a seed planter, because the seeds.
That's what I say on my show and other shows too. Shows like this, one of the several reasons why I do it is to plant seeds.
Yes.
So we'll continue. So I'm totally with you on these topics.
Mm.
Yeah, go ahead, please. I'm sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. Trying to and again, part of politics, if you're getting into activism, is people. You're going to deal with all sorts. You're going to deal with people who you don't agree with, except for on the fact that you don't like where the Democrats are right now. And I've dealt with those people. But it's, again, that's part of being a seed planter. But as an activist, maybe I'm not saying grow a thick skin. I'm saying
the old phrase, Rome wasn't built in a day.
Yes, exactly. And one thing I see so much about, yes, that's a huge one. But I think more to the point that I just thought of, is give people, you need grace, because the main part, activism is an activism without people. And one of the main things I see in my 10 years hit plus or minus with the St. Louis County GOP is people burnout. Is people get sick of the other guy who comes to the meeting too. They can't stand him. They, they're so upset with, how the state party's going, and stuff like that they can't take it. And I know, and some people do need to take a break. It's okay. So I'm not condemning that, but I'm saying prepare yourself for that. And when those things happen, and you're so sick of, I don't know, our state chair's name is David Hahn, and he's an okay guy, but if you're so sick of what David Hahn is doing with the state party, then be ready for that, and do as you're doing, Nevin, and strike out doing your own thing for a while, or focus on local politics. Like we just had a new candidate announced for the Iron Range Republicans recently, and we're all super excited about him. And I kind of know that that's where my head's going to be. This next election is in local politics. The national is really interesting, and I'm excited to kind of see where that's going. And I'm going to say Sohrab Ahmari one more time, because he's one of my favorite writers now. He's just put out a piece in American Conservative that was just I call it a Christmas article, but maybe that's just because it's less dour than some of the other articles that have come out recently. But it's this really just nice, hopeful piece on where we're headed as a country, and kind of how things are shaping up. And I hope you'll go read it. But now I forgot where I was going with that whole spiel. Anyway, do you have any more questions?
It ties into activism. So Rob's article, of which you say is a Christmas present, sort of, where it gives of hope. And yeah, we should concentrate on our strengths, and we also have to be realistic with our goals too, as well.
Yes, that's a good way of saying it. Because you're not well, in the end, and I'm talking again to the audience, like you're just gonna dip your toes in. You're not gonna be George Washington running down Bunker Hill, with guns ablaze, and that'll be it. This is I think way too many people get involved thinking that we're close. kind of like close to Armageddon, and that there's just kind of that one battle over the hill that's going to save us all. I get that feeling a lot from especially people now with the presidential primaries coming up. We're going to get a lot more activists in who are been, tuning into the presidential race, and they want to help out. And that's great. Please do. But again, set your standards realistically. You're going to be in this for at least, the next 2 years. If you're in Minnesota, you become a delegate for the state party for 2 years. So it's kind of, we'll say, the job term with our caucus system. And you're going to do very little realistically in those 2 years, but every little bit helps. So I've been big into just kind of study. I don't know about studying, but kind of just getting into mental health lately too. And I see a lot of things that I mentioned, like burnout and stuff like that afflict people in politics. So I try to tend to take that route. It's like, okay, calm down, boy. You're excited. That's great, but you're going to burn out way too quick. But so that's my encouragement to your listeners. And yeah, if anyone has any more questions, they can follow us at we're Iron Range GOP, well, at Iron Range Repub on Twitter or X. I'll call it Twitter to the day I die. That'll be my one. My kids will be like, Dad, why do you still call it Twitter? I'm like, because X is a dumb name. But yeah, thanks for having me on, and we'll definitely keep in touch. And anything else before I?
No, you've been a fascinating guest. You've lent so much real life experience on the ground, what's going on in the Republican Party in your area, especially some of the push and pull, and some of the work that you're doing. Where can they find you on Facebook, Twitter again, please?
Okay, yep. So hold on, I always forget our handle. We have we actually got in Twitter jail with one of our Facebook sites. So we have two. They're both functional, but we can only run ads through one of them. So on Facebook, we you can find us at, where's our handle? Well, it's MNGOP of St. Louis County is our kind of main one. And then our other one is Iron Range GOP, which you'll see one has an elephant with a white background, one has an elephant with a blue background. And then our Twitter handle is at Iron Range GPub, or no, wait, at Iron Range Repub. That's what it is. So IRONRANGEREPUB. I wanted the full thing, but word limits, etc. So.
Okay, well, thank you so much for appearing on this program. Hope to have you back again as a guest, commenting on politics and the political dynamics within the conservative movement and the Republican Party. Again, thank you so much for taking your time. It's been a great interview. I've learned a lot, and hopefully the viewers will learn quite a bit of information too. And have a great evening. Enjoy the rest of your week and be safe.
You as well. Thank you.
Thank you.